Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today I'll be showing how to make this text forming spline effect. Guided spline will change into text with progressive time. It's an effect commonly seen in title logo animation, but we can automate this using geometry nodes. I'll only be covering basic node setup for this video, but with some adjustment to guide curves, possibilities are limitless. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, as soon as we get into Blender, we'll hop right into Geometry Nodes Layout, H select all, X to delete. Shift A, add mesh plane. Using numpad 7 and 5, go into top orthographic view. Click on new, delete group input, and replace it with a string input. We're going to start off with a single letter today, so I'm going to pick S, then use the strings to curve, and output. Alright, today's effect is going to be a text forming curve, which will have some kind of a guide spline, like so. And a portion of this spline is going to shift around towards the text, and it's going to wrap around and form this S and stop. Okay, so this is going to be the effect. So let's jump right in. Alright, so starting off with resampling, we'll change the count to length and type in 0.01. Then we'll use a set spline cyclic and turn off cyclic. So what happens now is we have a gap right here, which the starting point index is going to be 0 and ending point index is going to be 202. Okay, so how do I know this? Well, I've done this a couple times. Right, so what I want to do is add a guide spline from the index 0. But before I do that, I want to change the location of this gap. I'm gonna shift it all the way here, okay, where we have the maximum X value. The reason why I want to do this is because if I choose a different letter, we can see that the gap is located in different positions. So this is going to be the entrance point of how the text forms. So I want to have some kind of a uniformity. So in case of W, I want to move it all the way over here. Okay. That's why I want to shift around that gap position. So let's go back to S and start doing that. Alright, so let's realize instance. Then from the result, grab an attribute statistic and grab a position node. Use a separate XYZ and plug in the X to attribute. From max, grab a compare equals. Then using the X value, plug it into B, like so. Okay. Kind of like this. Alright, so if I were to check out the value or result here, we can see that it's highlighting these points. There are going to be multiple points that fulfill this condition. So we want to select one point out of that, in which what I'll do is grab another attribute statistic, plug the result into selection, and grab an index and plug it into attribute, like so. Okay. Alright, so now if we use a minimum or maximum, we're going to have an index of the furthest most point, one of the candidates of the furthest most points. So what I'm going to do is use a set position, and also let's grab a sample index, and change the data type to vector, plug in a position into value, then index into index. Now if I plug in the result to position, nothing changes because we're basically sampling the same index. But if I add a mass node and add some values to it, you can see the starting position move around, right? Right, so let me plug in the minimum into the value, then fix this point by using a floored modulo, and plug in point count, spline length point count, and take a modulo like so. Okay. Alright. So now we got all these points shifted around, and we have the gap starting over here. Great. Let's start adding the guide curve or guide spline like this, starting from this position and going all the way like that. You can have this guide curve in any kind of shape, but I'm just gonna do it like that for now. So let's first add a curved line and change the operation type to direction, and change the direction to 1, 0, 0, and let's just output these together. Okay. Alright, so we have this new spline coming out right here. So what I want to do first is set the starting position to over here. So let's grab the set position result and use a sample index. Change the data type to vector, then plug in position into value. Plug in the result to start. Alright, so it has moved over here, which is what we want. Now let's adjust its length. So right now it's length of 1, but what I want is to have a length of this text curve, text spline, plus a little bit extra, right? So let's grab another sample index. And grab a spline length right here, and connect it to length. Alright, so we see that we have a spline of the length of this text, but like I said, I want to add a little bit more extra, so let's add a mass, then add 1 to it. Alright, so we got this long spline which is coming out of this text spline, but I want it slacking down like so, coming down. So let's set some position, but before we do that, let's use a resample to add more points we can play with. Change it to length and change it to 0.01 as the same point count, well, resolution as a text spline. Then add a set position. From position, we'll grab a mix, and from mix, what we'll do is grab a position from A, then use a separate XYZ to separate them out. Then from X, use a combine XYZ and only combine X portion, then plug it into B, like so. So what we'll see now if we change the factor is if it's 0, it's a position that is connected to the text spline, and if it is 1, it's on the red line of y equals 0. Right, let me rearrange like so. Alright, so from the factor, what I'm gonna do is pull out a float curve, then from value get a spline parameter factor. Okay, so if I were to form the curve a little bit extreme like this, you can see the text or the guide curve slacking down like this. Okay, alright, so we got the shape that we want, so let's adjust it a little bit. But before we move on, this text, well, this guide spline has become a little bit longer since I've made it slack down. So what I'm going to do is use a trim curve to trim it back to original length, which is going to be this value right here. Okay. Then we want to resample it to the same resolution. Since it's a little bit deformed, we want to set it back. Okay. Right, cool. Right now we have these two splines, the text spline and the guide spline, like so. So if we look at the spreadsheet, you can see there's two splines. Let's merge them together to form one long spline, but unfortunately we don't have a way to do that in curve domain yet in geometry nodes. So let's first convert it to mesh using curve to mesh, and if I do that, all the points are now vertex and edges. So what we can do is use a merge by distance to merge the two edges together, then use a mesh to curve to convert it back to curve. And as you can see, we only have one spline now, which is going to be this huge long spline. This method works, except in case there are other overlapping points other than this point, it could unexpectedly merge those points, since this merged by distance is gonna affect everything. So what we can do is specify these 2 points that are overlapping, which we wanted to connect. So let's do that. So in the beginning, we move the gap around so the starting index of 0 is over here. Okay, so 0 is here, and the point here is 202 at the end, right here. Let's make sure that's the case. So we have 203 points, meaning the index is going to go from 0 to 202. Okay. All right. So when we join it and change the curve to mesh, what's going to happen is we're going to have a point 0 starting here, and also this guide spline is going to start at point 203, right? Because this point is 202, it's going to start from 203 and go down this way. So we can basically select only those points and say we want to merge only those. Okay. All right. So let's grab a line out of this top spline, well, top noodle, then get a sample curve, no, sample index, I'm sorry, sample index, then change the data type to integer and value point count, spline length point count into the value, like so. Then using an index node, we can use a compare equals with this value, which is going to be 203. Then grab these two nodes, Shift D to duplicate and bring it down, and make index compare itself with 0. So we got index 0 and index 203, which should be the overlapping points. Okay. Now we want to include both of them, so let's use a Boolean mass OR and connect these two up and plug it into selection like so. Okay. Now we basically have only these 2 points being merged. Great. So we got one huge spline, which is this whole thing. All we have to do now is select the position that we want it showing. So what we'll do is use a trim curve, change the value to, well, change the operation to length, and let me just increase the end position like so. Alright, so what we want to do is starting from a curve like this, and we want the curve going to the left and forming the text. But it's kind of hard to think of both starting position and ending position at the same time, so I'm just gonna focus on end first. So what do we want end to do? Well, what we want to do is basically decrease its value, decrease until it reaches this point. Okay, so what is the initial length that we want? Well, it's going to be the spline length. So let's plug in spline length, and this is going to be the total length of this guide and text spline. And what we'll do is use a mass, then subtract scene time from it. Okay, so if I run the animation, it's going to decrease, shrink, and it's going to go to nothing. So what we want to do is stop it at the text spline length. So let's grab a max node, plug it into here. Then we want to grab the text spline length, which we've already calculated over here, right? This sample index. So I'm going to grab this line and plug it into the maximum, like so. Alright. Okay. So if I rerun the animation, you can see it's shrinking and it stops right here. Great. What about starting position? Well, the starting position we want is somewhere around here, and we want it going all the way to 0. Okay, we want this starting position and ending position relation to have this is the length of the spline curve, well, text spline. So we want it starting from text spline length, then going all the way down to 0. So in order to get the text spline length of the starting position, it is actually going to be the result of this add. I'm not going to go through the arithmetics, but just trust me on this. And if I plug it into start, and let me just reroute and duplicate a subtract, then using the same scene time, let's subtract the value, and if we run the animation, you can see it's, yeah, basically doing what we want it to do. Alright, well, let's first add a speed controller. So if you want to control the speed, we can add a mass node right here, change it to multiply, and say if we set the speed to 2, it's going to go much faster. If we set it to 0.5, it's going to go much slower. Okay, I'm I'm gonna set it back to 1. Let's set the time to 100 frames. Alright, so basically we are done with single letter. Now what we can do is repeat this operation for a longer word. Okay, so let me go back to where this realize instances and let me reroute. Okay. What I'm gonna do for repeating is I'm gonna use a for each element node, which was introduced in 4.3. We can also do this with repeat zone for previous versions, but in that case we'll need to use things like separate geometry and manually add an iterator. But if you have version over 4.3, we have this option of using for each element, which allows you to iterate through a specific domain. So in this case, I'm going to use a spline. So it's going to iterate through each spline, which is perfect for what we want to do. So I'm going to reconnect like so, and bring the exit portion all the way to the right. Right after the trim curve, and reconnect like so. Alright, so let's go back to the original string. I'm going to change this to, well, test. Okay, so if I rerun the animation, all the text are going to be forming from multiple guide splines, like so. Right. All we have to do now is turn this into mesh so we can render. So let's go to after for each element and use a curve to mesh. Then for profile curve, I'll be using a curved line. You can use circles and things like that if you want to make it into 3D, but I'll use a curved line. Set the start and end position to 0.5 on each side, and use a set curve radius so I can control the width. Okay, I'm going to change the radius to 0.01, and if I rerun the animation, you can see it's a mesh now. Okay. Unfortunately, the poly curve that we're using results in a ugly corner like this. So what I like to do is change the spline type using set spline type and change it into NURBS. So as you can see, NURBS are gonna end up with cleaner corners, but just be aware that NURBS is gonna add a lot more poly. So it's probably going to be about 10 times the amount of vertices, but NURBS is much cleaner as an end result. Okay. Alright, pretty much we're done with the effect that we want, but let me just show you a couple ways to add variations. So currently the spline is coming in from the right. But if you want the curved segment to come in from the left, what you can do is change the direction on this curved line, change it to -1, so it's going to come in from the left and form the text. And if you also want to change the entrance point of these gaps, you can adjust attribute statistics calculation. Right now we're using maximum X, but we can choose minimum X if you want it coming in from the left. So in that case, it's going to look like this. or you can change it to things like Y if you want it coming in from vertically or things like that. Alright, we currently have all the text forming simultaneously, or the splines coming in simultaneously, but we can add a little bit time difference and make it come in one at a time. Now what we have to do is create a space a little bit after this scene time, add a subtract, then using this index output, plug it into the subtract like so. Okay. Alright. So if I run the animation, you can see T coming in and forming, then E. Oh, it's too short. T coming in, E coming in, then S and T. Alright. Cool. So we're done with the effect. I'm not gonna go through a material today, so let's take a look at what we did. It's kind of elongated node tree, but you can think of it in a couple of different portions. So this part forms this text mesh, or it forms a text. Then we are controlling its entrance point. Then we are adding the guide spline. We are merging those two together. Then we are calculating the portion that we want to show. Okay, so that's how we can look at it. Let's go in and zoom in from the left. Here we go. Alright, so yeah, this is the effect that you can probably see in forming logos, logo animation and things like that. It's kind of cool effect. Well, I hope you get to use it, and hope to see you next time.